Hello and welcome to our next video. In this lesson, we're going to go over working with Java class libraries and calling the methods on those libraries. So the first thing you're going to want to do is probably just go out to Google and type in Java Math 8 or Java String 8 and get those up on your browser so that you can have them handy to look at them. So we have string and math. And so what we're going to do is we're going to be taking a look at the string library, which of course is what our string variable relies upon, java.lang.string. So we create a string variable, we can do some things against that string because of this library. For example, we can format it, or we can take a look at where an index of a character is inside of that string, or a last index of. We're also going to be taking a look at substring, to lowercase, to uppercase, equals, and equals ignore case. And so you can see that you can use any of these methods. And the same thing with math, the java.lang.math class. You can do that to get any kind of math operation that you need. We're going to take a look at square root and multiply, just to get us familiar with it again. So just remember that, of course, these are provided for us, so we don't have to do anything special. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, since this is the first time we've done this, I'm going to walk you through this, but in the future you'll need to be able to do this on your own. If I provide resource files for the project, you'll need to extract them and put them into your project directory. So if you haven't already, the first thing you should do is create some sort of project directory on your machine where you've also set your Eclipse workspace to, that you can easily put projects folders in there and be able to work with them by importing. So I'm going to go ahead and extract the Working with Class Libraries resource file. And I'm just going to go ahead and extract it as is. I have a folder here, and I just double check if there's one inside. We need to make sure that we only get the level that has these folders. So if I put this whole thing in there, it would be a mess. So let's grab this one, and I'm just actually going to move it here. Since it's extracted, I could do it again if I needed to. So now that folder's empty, so I'll just go ahead and delete it. And we see over here is 101 Working with Class Libraries, and again, just verify that the first level has the settings bin source. I'm going to go ahead and File, Import existing projects into Workspace, and so it's going to look in my default directory. So it's already set up to the browse, and so what I'm going to do is just go ahead and select OK. And I'm going to go ahead and import 101 Working with Class Libraries. So now that project is in place, and we have the code ready to go. So you'll note there's a couple things already imported, java.util.stream, java.util.stream.collectors.joining. That's for a stars method I wrote using some lambda. So if you don't understand this statement, it's okay. This might be a little too advanced, and that's fine. This is just a lambda. It's going to essentially do the same thing that you could do with a for loop, looping on the number, and a string builder appending the stars. And so it's just going to create a flat line of stars with whatever number I pass in. So you can look at that on your own time if you're interested in it. But let's look at some of the string operations. So java.lang.string, we just create our string variable. We've done the impossible, and that makes us mighty. And so then a quote part here is impossible. And note that the quote part doesn't match up with the quote. We did that on purpose so that we can make sure it doesn't match unless we're using equals ignore case later, or we lower it to do the match. I'm going to Control M, and that's going to make this bigger. That allows us to see it. You could have also done that by double clicking. So now we can see this code a little easier. So I have the quote length. We're going to print those out just to see that they are what we think they are. We're going to look at contains. So we'll call the string .contains. So this is just my variable quote .contains, and then whatever I'm trying to look for here in case it's quote part. So we'll see it should be false. This should be false. This should be true because the impossible will be lowered to match. Here we have the first character in quote is char at 0. And you might ask, why 0? Well, once again, if you remember, a string is nothing more than a character array that's inside of a wrapper. And so essentially, you can get every single position of that string just like you could get any position from an array. And so it's an array of characters, so we can pull char at, or char at, however you want to say that, position 0, which is the start. Remember that arrays are 0-based indexed, which means that if we want to get 18 length, we go to character 17. So the 18th character in quote is char at 17. And if we want to get the end, the last character, we go to the quote.length, which is just another method on string. We can get the length of any string. And we subtract 1 because, of course, we're 0-based, so we need to have that 1 offset. So here we have quote index of m. is going to be our first m and last index of t. So that'll be our last t. And so we have the first index of m in quote is position first m. The last index of t is at position last t. And we're going to have the word impossible starts at offset. And offset is just going to be the quote part to lowercase. Once again, we know that that should match. And substring. We can work with substring getting any position. So we start again at 0 and go to position 18, which will give us the first 17 characters. And then we have from 18 on. We have to start at the same place we left off if we don't want to leave any characters. And here we're just going to get a partial substring from the first m to the last t. And the substring from first char to char 18 in quote is first char 18. From 19 to the end, from m to last t is this. And basically at the end, we're going to do a little bit of substring fun. We're going to say working with strings is not impossible. And I'm just doing this in 2 different ways so we can see the difference between print line and printf. Of course, printf is just going to give us a formatting, and we'll just replace the string here, %s, with our variable, quote.substring, offset plus quote part.length. And we'll actually be able then to just put the exclamation point right in the same string, rather than using multiple plus signs to concatenate the string. Finally, for strings, we have 2 different Fred Flintstone names. One is all small, one has some capital letters, and this is just again to emphasize equals versus equals ignore case. Remember, if we're working with strings, case sensitivity is important. So they'll only be equal if we ignore the case or perform an upper or lower on both sides to make sure that they're equal. And once that runs, we'll have those 3 star lines. So I'm just going to print this out here. The bottom part is the math. So let's just take a look. Of course, we see false, false, true. We have our different characters in position. We have position 16, 49, 15. We have our substrings. We have from M to T. It looks like I should have done a -1 offset there. And that's, going to be, if you're working with substrings, you need to be careful of that. Looks like I have just a little bug there. I would need to -1 on that overall length where I had, I believe it was this part here. Yep, and that got us our M to T like we expected. So be aware of that when working with substrings. Once again, since it's a 0-based array, that's a very common bug. And we see working with strings is not impossible. Our 2 case sensitivities worked as expected, false and true. Finally, let's look at math quick before we close off. So once again, math is just another library. Here we have 3 doubles, x, y, and z. Z is ultimately just going to store the result of x. We're not even going to use y. And so we can see 144 is going to be stored into z, or the square root of 144 will be stored into z. And then we'll print that out. So that should be 12. And here we can see we have some funny 0.4, 0.1. We'll look at that in a second. And we have math.multiply 10 times 2, so this should be 20. Should be pretty easy to work with. And we have a 0.0 here. So hopefully you can start to see what that means. We're formatting that to show the number of decimal places. So we had 0, 4, and 1. So if you wanted to do 2, for instance, and maybe this is, in this case, it doesn't make sense, but maybe it's a monetary value, you'd put a $sign in front of it. It looks like $12 in US dollars, of course. You can see how it's very easy to format doubles that way, as well as working with some of these numbers. But that essentially wraps our look at working with Java libraries and the methods on those libraries. So once again, remember, you just go out and you take a look at the documentation, you find the method you want to call, you look at what its return type is going to be, so you have something to know what your variable should be stored in. So here, if we were looking for max, we'd pass in 2 doubles, we would get back a double, and that would give us the max of the 2. We call the method max here on the math class, but if we're working with strings, we actually call it on a variable. So if I want to do my string equals, or my string equals ignore case, another string. So that's the difference between the 2, but that gives us a real good look and refresher on working with the Java class libraries and the methods associated with them. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.